John, you have worked on some very interesting natural language problems, right? Problem solving. I always feel that natural language is the first start and the last frontier. If you're able to converse with the system, if the systems are context and ambient aware, that's where I think the general perception is yes, we are there, we are expecting R2D2s of the world. So tell me, what's happening in the natural language processing and understanding?
There's just been so many great advances in natural language processing recently. I can tell you about a project that I'm working on that I'm very excited about. It's interesting, and I think it comes down a little bit to what Reid was saying: is don't do, make things as ethical as possible. One of the things that's clear to us is that the wonderful transformation that natural language processes makes in the world is kind of unevenly divided. There are maybe 20 high resource languages that are very well covered in NLP in terms of, chatbots or, all of the tools that necessarily come with being able to converse with a computer, by text or by voice. But do you have any idea how many languages there are in the world? And this surprised me. Well, we have a project called 5,000 Languages, and there are roughly 5,000 spoken languages. And, it's a long tail kind of thing. And so many of these languages are what we would call low resource. They do not have a huge corpus of written data. They do not have a large number of speakers. And what happens is that people who speak these languages, don't benefit in terms of all the advances in technology. And it's pretty pervasive. NLP is starting to be used in all sorts of things, in retail and, taxes, everything. So our 5,000 Languages project is trying to figure out both for the business reasons of sort of digital enablement, how do you provide NLP kind of capabilities? So we're working in geographies like South America, particularly in Brazil, where there are, roughly 500 languages spoken, and some of them only by a small group. So some of those are business, where languages like Guarani are spoken by millions of people, but those people are not able to actually work at the same level with banking, insurance, et cetera, at NLP. So we're trying to figure out how to deal with languages at that level, but also from a kind of a cultural preservation. There's a big interest in there are some languages that we're looking at that only have a few hundred speakers. And from a cultural, encouragement, how can we actually capture those languages? What's very interesting from it technically is that the traditional ways of training in NLP is to have a huge amount of labeled data, lots of resources, et cetera, and then you can train these large models, these transformer models, GPT-3, those kind of things. But what do you do when you don't have all of that labeled data? So we're looking at experiments, particularly in understanding, languages of a common lineage. What can I apply from the grammatical constructs in a nearby language? So to do kind of educated transfer learning from other languages that we do have a lot of resources, and then apply those rules so that you make up for the fact that you can't do the normal, supervised learning. So it's very interesting. We're looking at native languages in this country and in Canada. We're looking at Indian, a large number of Indian languages, a large number of African languages, and it's just been fascinating.
That's very interesting. I have one follow-up question on that. So off late, right, if you talk about language, we have come from talking volumes to 140 characters, or maybe conversing more through emoticons, right? So in that space, when you talk about, on one side, you are trying to discover and preserve the languages and their sanctity. On the other hand, we are racing towards history in terms of being almost borderline hieroglyphics level talking. So how do you balance and say yeah, this is still important and relevant?
Well, I think from the cultural, how do you put a price on, the preservation of a culture? What we're finding though, I think it's interesting because, our intent in our laboratory is actually more on the academic side. So I'm not working on the commercial application. So we're not trying to, bring those very low resource languages into chatbot land, so because they typically are people who are, who are by choice or by circumstance are not, into modern commerce. But I think the idea of, how do you preserve somebody's language? How do you actually boost it? There's so many great stories that we're running into of how, a dedicated group of people are actually starting to teach, going back and trying to reverse all sorts of cultural hegemony, to try to teach the native languages in the schools and to try to build them back up. I think from a technical standpoint, what's also interesting is, trying to figure out how do you actually capture the data that you need in these cases? And oftentimes, I'm thinking of your hieroglyphics point, what we're finding is in lieu of having a large number of written corpus, we find that actually doing language to language translation by looking at a picture, for example, something that's universal, and having someone describe it in their native language, so that the sort of symbolic uplift, what are the actual symbolic constructs, sort of using that as a translation. So a bit like a hieroglyphic, is we're sort of trying to figure out, the universal aspect of what our minds, contain. Natural language sort of does that, but we're actually taking it up one level to sort of using pictorial descriptions as a way of capturing.